Day 4 of the 2024 Superbet Poland Rapid and Blitz saw the first day of Blitz action as the incoming leader, the number 2 Chinese player Wei Yi, simply continued his dominance, scoring 7.5 out of 9 points today to extend his lead over Magnus Carlsen and the rest of the field. Jumping into the standings, today we had 9 rounds of Blitz as the players went through their first round robin. Wei Yi sits at the top with 20.5 points after a huge day, scoring 7.5 out of 9, which included 5 straight wins at the end. Magnus Carlsen had a more up and down affair, but did manage to finish the day in second place with 18 points after scoring 6 out of 9 himself. Keep in mind, these points do include the players' standings from the rapid portion of the event. The rest of the tournament is now basically fighting for third place, with Pragnananda and Erigaisi leading with 14.5 and 14 points each. Jumping into the games, Wei Yi actually started the day with a loss in the first round to Gukesh. This is his second round game against Vincent Keimer when he managed to begin to bounce back. And in this position, Black's last move was bishop to b4, attacking the rook on e1, also attacking the knight on e5. But Wei Yi found a very nice combination here, starting with bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and now knight to g4, hitting the queen, which is hanging with check. So Black doesn't have time to take on e2. They would end up losing the exchange here after White takes on f6 and then takes the rook. So Black played queen to f4 here, but now queen takes e8. Wei Yi sacrifices the queen for 2 rooks and ends up in this position, which is quite advantageous for White. The 2 rooks do outplay the queen here, and this ends up getting very, very bad for Keimer very quickly after f4 and g4, looking to win the bishop with f5. Not a lot of time for Vincent to figure this one out. He does allow f5 here. White wins another piece and soon wins the game. Bishop to d5, rook to f1, all the pieces coming in here for White, and knight e6, bishop e4. That was the final blunder. White wins back the queen, and Keimer resigned. Wei Yi would then face Magnus Carlsen, and this would of course be a key game for the standings, with Wei Yi having White in their first encounter. They'll then again play tomorrow with reverse colors. And this game was quite interesting. It started off as a Taimanov, very, very sharp opening here right from the get-go, e5, b4. Here, Wei Yi plays knight cb5. The engine doesn't like this one. It seems to suggest e takes f6 is probably the main move here. After knight b5 takes, Black did have a chance to play queen to a5 here, which might have been quite messy. Instead, we see queen to b8, and quickly the players actually reach this endgame, which is approximately equal. However, Magnus does get the best of Wei Yi in this one, as he soon gets an advantage here. Bishop to b7, bishop comes into f3, and yeah, he slowly starts to outplay Wei Yi in this position. As the players trade pieces, we get this endgame with bishop versus knight, and this one ends up being very, very sharp here. Magnus building his advantage now, h5, h4, going after the kingside pawns, and essentially Black's counterplay here is just much, much faster. Now at this point, both players are basically down to seconds. Wei Yi starts playing on the queen side as he's basically lost on the king side. And it is winning for Black here, as Black just has too many pawns in the center. The game does get very, very sharp, as you can see both sides having multiple passed pawns. But Black's pawns are stronger, and again, both players just playing on the increment here, really relying on their instincts. And this one gets very, very hectic after d3. Takes on d3, knight d3, throws in a check, takes on d3, e2. Wei Yi now has to give up a rook in order to deal with this passed e-pawn. And here Magnus is up a full rook, but after this strong move rook to c3, very resourceful, it's really not easy to deal with White's 2 connected passed pawns on the queen side. And with Magnus's next move rook to b1, he actually does blow the win here. Apparently rook h8 was one of the several ways to win in this position. One possible line here would be like c7, f4. And White can push this pawn if White makes the queen. The basic point is that that rook endgame is going to be winning for Black, with the f-pawn being too strong. Instead, what we see in the game is rook to b1, and here after b5, Magnus is just not in time to deal with the pawns and get his own counterplay going. Wei Yi is fast enough here with b7, and soon Magnus is forced to give up not one rook, but both rooks for each of the pawns. We end up in this endgame, and this one is definitely drawn, as white will have to give up his rook for black's last pawn. So this is definitely a half point that Carlsen might have left on the table, as this critical game was indeed drawn. Moving on, Wei Yi then found himself with a nice streak of 5 straight wins. He won 5 straight games in the Rapid earlier, and he managed to finish the Blitz off with 5 straight wins as well. Not without some luck in this first game against Giri. Giri finds a very strong sacrifice here with bishop takes g6, and this does lead to a decisive advantage for white, but it really wasn't easy. Of course, white sacrificed the piece. He does get a very, very strong attack here with this pawn on e6. After bishop to d6, Giri missed the win here with queen f6 check. This was the key move. If king to g8, then white has bishop takes b4, which is quite a powerful tactic. If black takes that one, then it's queen d8 check, and black's rook on c7 is lost, and white would be up a ton of material. Instead, Giri went wrong. He gives the check on h6. Now after king to g8, there's no tactic bishop takes b4. He tries to get the bishop in with bishop to d2, but essentially black does start to take over here, as Wei Yi brings all of his pieces into the defense, eventually forces this endgame. And the endgame is still very, very tricky. White has a lot of pawns for the sacrifice piece, 3 pawns to be exact, but black's bishops are very, very strong, and the king is also in play. And slowly but surely here, Wei Yi does take over. Bishop takes e6, bishop to d5, and eventually he does convert this one very, very nicely into the win. I'll end the game somewhere around here, as the game does get very messy, but long story short, black's pieces do break through. He wins all of white's pawns and eventually forces resignation. There's a ton of games to go through. Of course, we won't be able to look at all of them, but I would encourage you folks to check out all the games. You can find them on chess.com on their events page, and of course, you can also watch the full live broadcast to get a glimpse of all of the action, because there really was a ton of games, multiple rounds with all decisive games. And of course, here we can only show just the absolute highlights. Moving on, Wei Yi's game against Arjun Erigaisi. This is part of his streak, and this one blows up after white's move d4. If black takes, that opens up a discovered attack against the queen on g5. Arjun drops back, c5, and now bishop to c7, a key mistake here from Erigaisi, because after d5, bishop takes e4, d6, white wins a crucial tempo here against the bishop, which then has to go to a5. It should have just went to a5 earlier, and then here black could play bishop to b4, and the position would still be super complicated. But here Wei Yi assumes control. His d-pawn is incredibly strong, and after a bit of tactics here, queen takes c6, white ends up with 2 connected passed pawns in the center of the board. These are very, very strong and do give white a decisive advantage. Arjun tried to create some counterplay here on the king side, but Wei Yi had everything under control, keeping everything defended, and eventually these pawns did decide the day. This one couldn't be taken because of rook takes b4, bishop d6 here, rook f2, keeping control, and eventually Wei Yi does kind of force the endgame, after which it's simply all over. c7, takes, extra piece from white, and he converted this one quite smoothly. Next up, we have Wei Yi's game against Praggnanandhaa. This was also another very, very nice game coming from the King's Indian. Praggnanandhaa definitely looking to play this one for a win, but it ends up going in white's direction after e takes f5, g takes f5, bishop to d2, a nice preparatory move stepping back from black's pawns. Queen e8, rook e1, king h8 was played, and now knight to d4, using the pin on the e-file. Wei Yi sneaks the knight into e6. Now at this point, black basically had to take this knight and play something like rook a8, and then white is doing well. But Pragg instead plays the move rook to f6, likely underestimating white's response here, g4. Fantastic move from Wei Yi, again using another pin, this time on the diagonal. Now he's not really threatening to take anything because his own pawn is pinned on the g-file, but this is a problem for black. White has g5 ideas. He can bring the knight or bishop to g5, and black is essentially just getting busted up on the king side. Everything is hanging. So e4 is played, but now knight takes e4. Very nice combination. here found by Wei Yi. After takes, white gets 2 pawns for the piece, but he's actually going to get the piece back because black's queen has to get off of the g file, knight to g5, another tempo, and now he takes on h7, just taking all of the material in the position. The knight on h5 is hanging as well, and basically, yeah, white is just winning the house here. The game did continue. It was, of course, quite hectic. Not a lot of time for the players, but Wei Yi does manage to get the job done. Very nice rook lift here. Rook to b3, rook to g3, and queen a1 check was the end of the game. Here, Prague resigns as the attack on the diagonal is just way too strong. If queen to g7, for example, white can just trade queens on g7, king takes, bishop takes f5, comes with check. Black can take on g3, but after f takes g3, white ends up with an extra piece in the endgame, 2 bishops, and of course, a completely winning position. Finally, we have Wei Yi's game against Noterbeck. This happened in the last round of the day. And in this one, we had an approximately equal position here coming out of the Sicilian, but Noterbeck goes wrong with this move b4, simply creating too many weaknesses on the queen side, which Wei Yi does take advantage of. Knight a4, knight b6 is now played, but takes, and knight to e5. And the problem for white here is that the bishop is coming to a2, and white is soon losing the exchange. In fact, there's just no way to deal with this threat. Black is either winning the exchange here or just going to pick up white's entire queen side with like bishop to b2, for example, takes and takes. So bishop e3, bishop a2 is played. f4 trying to get some counterplay, some compensation for the exchange, but it really wasn't enough here. This is just a pure exchange up position for black. And not a lot of time. These are blitz games. I should mention the time control is 5+2. But once again, Wei Yi's technique here was quite sound. He simply slowly makes progress here. Takes rook to b6, and yeah, eventually the rooks do get in, and Noterbeck did have to resign this one, giving Wei Yi 5 straight wins to finish off the day. Moving on to Carlsen's day, he started off with a win this first game against Shevchenko. Might not have gone Magnus's way, but here in this position, instead of taking on c4, after which seems like only black can really be better in the position, Shevchenko, not a lot of time, plays this one a bit passively. Rook d7 here, rook to d8, and after bishop to c1, h5, and queen to c5, Magnus simply wins the game here. Knight to g6, rook takes c6. White picks up a couple pawns on the queen side, and black does try to fight back here, but it's just too many pawns now. It's 3 extra pawns for white. Bishop on e3 controlling everything, and yeah, Magnus was able to win this first game of the day. However, Magnus then started to struggle a bit. His next game was against Pragnananda. Here playing black, makes a really risky decision, knight to e4, allowing Prague to trade off his bishop here. And after takes on e4, Prague gets the classic queen and knight combination, which generally in practice is a little bit stronger than the queen and bishop. And here that definitely proves to be the case. As Prague keeps his queen very active, Magnus starts pushing on the king side, trying to create counterplay with f4, but knight comes into e3, bishop e6, and now queen c6 and c4. This one really well played by Prague. He gets the pawn to d5, bishop to d7, and now queen to h6, and black's king is definitely in a lot of trouble here. Magnus does find the best defense with queen f6 and after queen h7 check, he needed to play queen to g7 in this position. If white trades, then that endgame is approximately equal. After queen h5 check, black can play king to f8, for example. Queen to g6 is also fine, and black is holding on. However, Carlsen does blunder here with the move king to e8. This allows queen g8 check, and now knight takes c4, threatening d6, which is a huge threat in this position. And now it's simply losing for black. D6 check, knight takes b6. Prague really precise here, finding all the right moves. And he does take the bishop on b5, queen takes b6, but now queen takes f5. Black's king side ends up collapsing, and the players end up in this queen endgame with just 1 extra pawn for white, but a very unpleasant endgame for black to hold. And Prague does end up winning this one and converting against Magnus. Magnus would then lose the next game against Noterbeck as well. This one was pretty crazy. In this position, black has a tactic with knight takes g3 available, using the potential discovered attack on the diagonal. But rook c7 is played, giving Magnus a chance now to overtake the initiative after queen to b5, queen d6, queen e8 check, and knight takes f7. It's white that gets the attack going. However, again, this game gets really, really crazy. Queen to d4. Noterbeck does go for some counterplay on the king side. But knight e5 check now, king to f6. If this one was taken, sorry, this one can't be taken because of the double attack. So king f6, the double check on the king, rook to e1, knight e4, knight g4 check, king g7. Now queen takes e6, knight takes g3. Again, the game just gets absolutely wild here. But knight e5, it is winning for Magnus. He finally finds a coordination here with queen to g6 check. And here, all he needs to do is just pick up the knight on f5 with check. Black would have to move the king, and then he can just play king takes f1. White would have a full piece ahead, an extra knight, just completely winning position. But Magnus, in huge time trouble, panics. He repeats once with queen f6 check and queen g6, but it's not a repetition. Noterbeck has the move rook to g7, pinning White's queen to the king on g1. Magnus completely blundered this, of course, and was forced to resign on the spot. However, Carlsen would bounce back in the tournament. First up, this is his game against Vincent Keimer. Here he opens up the king side with the move g5. Takes, queen h5 is played. Vincent looking to escape into the endgame, but after takes, knight to g4, this position ends up being very, very problematic for Black. White is attacking the e-pawn, and of course, the two bishops and knight are beautifully coordinated. Vincent tries e4 here, bishop to g6, now e takes d3, sacrificing the knight on h5 in order to get some counterplay with the d-pawn, but it's simply not enough. Bishop to c3, Magnus keeps everything under control here. h3, bishop f7, king to g2, Black's pawn is stuck, and White is just a piece up here, and at some point, I believe Vincent either resigned or just lost on time here, as yeah, Magnus does pick up this win. Carlsen then drew a game against Duda and would finish his day with 3 straight wins, starting with this one against Gukesh in the endgame. Really, really sharp position here. I mean, both sides have their trumps. Black has 2 passed pawns, but they're very much under control by Magnus's rooks. And in the meantime, Magnus's king here is quite active, and the pawns on the king side can eventually create some trouble. So bishop to d3 here, the players at this point were just playing on seconds. And unfortunately for Gukesh, his pawns just kind of get stuck and he's not able to make progress. Meanwhile, Magnus is able to just push e5, e6, bishop to e4, and eventually rook to d1. This is the decisive mistake. He had to just go rook to d2 here, keeping the pawn defended, looking to use the rook from behind. But he does play rook to d1, likely just forgetting that rook takes c2 now can be played. Magnus wins the first of the pawns. Now the a-pawn, of course, is still not going anywhere. After check, rook e3 here, f6, Gukesh simply resigns as White's pawns are winning the day. f7, e7, rook a8, everything in this position is basically threatening for White, and it's game over. Next, Carlsen had this position against Giri, and here after b4, Black's position is still fine as long as he just drops the bishop back, bishop e7, bishop f8. But Giri takes on b4, which ends up being a pretty critical mistake. So after takes back, bishop to d4, a5, White just gets a ton of play on the queen side, open c-file as well, takes on d4 to get the bishop pair, f3, and eventually here Magnus is able to simply just pick up this d-pawn. Giri tries to trade off some pieces here with takes and take c5, but simply Magnus drops back, rook to c1. The players get this endgame, just a very healthy extra pawn for White. Nice bishop for Magnus, and of course, he does end up converting this one against Giri. Finally, we have the game Carlsen against Erigaisi. Carlsen playing Black in this one. He was winning earlier. The players got into a very crazy knight endgame. Eventually, they ended up in this queen endgame. Erigaisi was holding here, the engines say at first, at queen to g2, queen e4 check. White is still within range of a draw, or at least holding on. Instead, Erigaisi in this position plays queen to g8 check, and after king to h5, queen to c4. He's simply running out of checks here. The problem is queen h7 runs into queen h6 check, and white's king is unfortunately in the wrong square on a6. Queen f7 check runs into queen g6 as well. Black forces a queen trade and is winning. So he's forced to go back queen to c4, but now black is able to advance the pawn with g2. Gives one more check, king to h6, but now it's all over. The only check in the position is queen e6. That'd be met with queen to g6, again forcing the queens off. And with that, Magnus was able to convert this one and finish his day with 3 straight wins and 2.5 points behind the leader, Wei Yi. So that takes us into tomorrow's second day of Blitz and final day of the tournament, as Wei Yi has a huge lead, 2.5 points against Magnus Carlsen, who also has a big lead over the rest of the field. The players will once again play everyone in the field once. They'll go through another round robin with reverse colors to what we saw today. So it should be another very, very exciting day of action. We'll see if Magnus can catch up to Wei Yi and fight for first place. Either way, it should be incredibly exciting, and we'll be back here for the recap. Hopefully you folks enjoyed this one, and until next time, take care.